This is not a story about economics. It is a story about gravity. We live on a financial planet where a hidden, invisible force dictates every motion, every value, and every future consequence, the crushing, pervasive weight of global debt. Public, private, and corporate obligations have swelled to such unimaginable proportions that they constitute the largest single artifact of human civilization, a $300 trillion colossus. This colossus is not only 4 times the size of the world's annual economic output, but is actively distorting our perception of reality. We casually issue 30-year mortgages, governments borrow trillions with a keystroke, and banks operate on a dizzying scaffold of leveraged promises, all while maintaining the dangerous fiction that this debt is normal, sustainable, and permanent. The truth is that debt is a time machine. It is the ultimate contract, allowing the present to live lavishly by coercing the labor and resources of the future. It has always been and remains the single greatest source of social, economic, and political instability. The question before us is not if this colossal debt bubble will burst, but when, and whether we can recognize the signs of the inevitable reckoning before its gravitational pull crushes the very system we depend upon. Part 1. The Ancient Ledger and the Necessity of Reset. To understand the present, we must go back to the origins of the ledger. Debt is not a modern invention. It is the cuneiform fingerprint of civilization itself. The very first written records, the clay tablets of ancient Sumer in Mesopotamia, thousands of years before the invention of coinage, were meticulous records of obligation. They recorded how much grain was owed, how many sheaves of barley, how many hours of forced labor. In these early societies, the concept of debt was sacred, but so too was its forgiveness. Early rulers, from Mesopotamian kings to ancient Hebrew prophets, understood a brutal sociological truth. Debt is a social acid. If allowed to accumulate endlessly, it corrodes the social contract. When free citizens were enslaved due to unpayable debts, when the gap between creditor and debtor became a chasm, the entire society seized up. Political instability became a mathematical certainty. The solution was the Jubilee, a grand, sweeping erasure of debt, a systemic Krull plus Alt plus Del that was enacted every few decades. The purpose of the Jubilee was not charity, it was self-preservation. Rulers recognized that resetting the financial clock was the only way to prevent a popular revolution and the collapse of the state. They understood that the collective well-being trumped the individual right of the creditor. Modern leaders, cushioned by layers of abstraction, pretend this necessity no longer applies. They believe their advanced financial engineering has repealed the ancient law of social gravity, but the underlying arithmetic remains unforgiving. Part 2. The Monarch's Trap and the Birth of Geopolitics. As commerce evolved, so too did the scope of debt. In the Renaissance, debt transitioned from a personal obligation over grain to a geopolitical weapon wielded in gold. The rise of banking families like the Medici in Florence elevated the status of the creditor to a power broker capable of financing popes and kings, but the most potent borrower in history has always been the sovereign state. Monarchs, perpetually hungry for capital to fund their imperial ambitions, their lavish courts, and their incessant wars, began borrowing in volumes that defied their national treasuries. Spain, a nation literally awash in silver and gold plundered from the New World, provides the quintessential cautionary tale. Despite an empire that spanned the globe, the Spanish crown declared sovereign bankruptcy 4 times in the 16th century alone. The king's ambition, fueled by easy access to the newly developing market for government bonds, always outran the nation's ability to generate real wealth. The first profound lesson of sovereign debt was learned. Even an empire built on gold can be drowned by paper promises. The nature of debt permanently changed with the great military conflicts of the 20th century. After World War I, the victorious nations found themselves carrying debt loads that were orders of magnitude larger than anything seen before. The Treaty of Versailles, by forcing Germany to assume crippling reparations debt, showed how external financial obligations could be weaponized. This led directly to the hyperinflation of the 1920s. This episode proved that debt is not merely an accounting problem. It is the fuel of political extremism and societal breakdown. Part 3. The Great Untethering, 1971, and Infinite Leverage. The modern debt explosion has a clear singular origin point, 1971. For a time after World War II, the financial world was structured under the Bretton Woods Agreement, 1944. This established a global architecture where the US dollar was the anchor. Its value was rigidly pegged to gold at $35 per ounce. Every major currency then pegged its value to the dollar. It was a semi-rigid system that required the United States, the world's sole financial superpower, to maintain fiscal discipline. But the enormous costs of the Vietnam War and expanded domestic social programs meant the US began printing dollars at a rate that outpaced its gold reserves. Foreign governments, noticing the erosion of trust, began demanding gold in exchange for their paper dollars. The gold window was draining fast. On August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon unilaterally announced that the dollar would no longer be convertible to gold. This was the Great Untethering, the moment the spaceship of global finance severed its last physical tether and entered the zero-gravity vacuum of fiat currency. The significance of this moment cannot be overstated. Debt, which had always been constrained by the finite supply of gold, was suddenly freed. Central banks realized they could manipulate interest rates and print money at will, limited only by the amorphous, fragile variable of public trust. This empowered a system where every future economic challenge, from slowing growth to a devastating financial crisis, could be solved with the addictive elixir of more debt. Each subsequent rescue operation required more debt, more leverage, and lower interest rates than the last, creating a compounding cycle of fragility. Part 4. The Colossus of $300 trillion. In the decades following 1971, the system has leveraged this new freedom to an apocalyptic degree. The global debt colossus, which today stands above $300 trillion, is an elaborate edifice built not on production, but on layered promises. The 2008 financial crisis was the first grand exposition of this leveraged world. It wasn't just a crisis about bad mortgages, it was a crisis of layered debt. Banks didn't just lend money once, they created financial instruments that allowed them to lend it 30 times over. Mortgages were pooled into securities, insured by derivatives, and amplified by breathtaking leverage ratios. When the underlying borrowers failed, the entire house of cards shook. This forced governments to step in with trillions in bailouts, a classic example of the system creating massive public debt to absorb catastrophic private losses. The bitter irony, reckless lenders were saved, prudent citizens were often left with the wreckage of austerity, unemployment, and foreclosure. Today, the debt has metastasized into every corner of the global economy. Sovereign debt? The US national debt is now over $34 trillion, with annual interest payments rivaling the defense budget. This means the world's most powerful economy is borrowing money just to pay the interest on previous borrowing, a perfect model of a debt treadmill. Corporate debt. Companies are borrowing at record low rates, not to fund factories or research, but often to conduct financial engineering like stock buybacks, juicing short-term profits while increasing their vulnerability to recession. Household debt. Families are trapped by student loans for ever more expensive education and soaring housing costs that require them to stretch their finances thin, increasing their personal fragility. The world is running a leveraged carry trade where stability depends entirely on rates staying low and confidence remaining high. The illusion works as long as the metaphorical music never stops. Part 5. The three forms of reckoning. No civilization, no empire, and no economic system has ever sustained an ever-growing debt mountain without an eventual reckoning. The debt will be erased. The only variable is how that erasure happens. There are only three ways to pay off a massive debt that exceeds a nation's ability to generate real wealth. Default, the hammer. This is the outright refusal to pay. It means a sovereign bankruptcy, a sudden, violent, and devastating financial event that wipes out creditors, destroys the financial reputation of the country, and immediately triggers an economic depression. History is littered with these defaults. From Spain to Argentina to modern Greece, it is the cataclysmic end, quick and painful. Inflation, the fire. This is the soft, silent default. When governments are too debt-laden to pay honestly, but too afraid of default, they choose to debase the currency. They allow or encourage inflation, which silently erodes the real value of the debt they owe. If prices rise by 10%, the real value of the government's debt shrinks by 10%. It is the ultimate stealth tax, a politically painless way to transfer wealth from savers and fixed-wage earners, the majority of the population, to the debtor, the state. The signs point strongly to this being the preferred path of our central banks and governments, as it is the most politically expedient way to manage a crushing debt burden. Austerity, the ice. This is the grim choice of painful, protracted repayment. It requires massive, deep cuts in government spending, tax hikes, and a prolonged period of economic stagnation and suffering. We saw elements of this in the Eurozone's response to the 2008 crisis. It is honest but politically toxic and almost always leads to social unrest before completion. The financial system is now set up for a choice between fire and hammer. Because central banks can always print money to avert a sudden default, inflation, the fire, is the most likely long-term path for Western nations. A gradual, persistent draining of the average citizen's purchasing power to keep the government solvent. Trell conclusion, escaping the gravity of debt. The greatest financial experiment in history, the age of infinite fiat-backed debt, is reaching its culmination. We are living in a moment of maximum financial abstraction, where the numbers on a screen bear little resemblance to the underlying reality of production and wealth. This colossal debt is not a neutral economic tool. It is a geopolitical time bomb, whose blast radius is determined by the three paths of reckoning. Understanding this dynamic is the only path to true financial resilience. When central banks promise that inflation is temporary, remember the historical necessity of debt forgiveness. When politicians assure you that trillions in deficits don't matter, remember the 4 bankruptcies of the Spanish Empire. The only true stability is a concept, not a currency. Your protection lies in deleveraging your life and building wealth that transcends the paper promises of the state. It means prioritizing real assets, things that cannot be printed, knowledge, the skill set that differentiates you, and independence, minimizing your reliance on the credit system. The system is not designed to free you. It is designed to keep you borrowing and spending, to keep the debt engine running. To choose freedom is to choose to step outside that cycle. The history of debt teaches one universal, unyielding lesson: the powerful rarely pay the price for their borrowing. When the reckoning arrives, whether by the hammer of default or the fire of inflation, the cost is always borne by those who failed to see the trap. Your only choice is whether you face the coming cycle blind or fully awake.